to start with you. So, like many of us, including myself, right, we first came across your work when you started like innovating with broken cables and socks and redesigning those into new items, new products, like fashionable items. I want to understand like what drew you to that to begin with, like why cables to begin with, and like what is it about this upcycling process that as a creative that you gravitated towards first?
Yeah, so I didn't actually decide to start with cables. I just found like some 40 cables in my room when I came back from uni, and I wanted to do something like creative with them. So it was just sort of experimenting with different materials and seeing what sort of conceptual stuff I could make. Why like upcycling and things like that? Well, I like the innovation process behind it. Like when you're taking like something old and making it into something new, you have to go through a lot of different processes. There's a lot of problem solving and thinking outside of the box. So that drew me to upcycling, and I've kind of been doing it from a young age anyway. When you don't have money to like buy new clothes all the time, you take what's in your wardrobe and you make it into something new. So yeah, that's my journey, I guess.
Okay. Nice. And like, obviously working with upcycled materials rather than raw materials, obviously that presents different challenges, you know, like making sure that the item is functional and wearable as well as aesthetically pleasing. Like, what challenges did you have when you started playing in that? Or was it something that you considered at the beginning, or was it like, actually no, I just care about how it looks, just that? Or were you also trying to find a way to make these items functional as well and wearable?
Yeah, when I started out, I didn't actually consider functionality. Like, I preferred form over function because I like doing the conceptual stuff, you know, just like having a blast and seeing what you could come up with without having to worry about if someone's going to wear this and like the longevity of it. So I didn't consider that, but when I started like building a brand, I had to consider stuff like that. So I had to design in a way where I knew the end goal would be like, this is something that's going to last, instead of designing and just like seeing where it goes, basically. So that's the challenge, and actually the fun part is just doing the conceptual stuff. It's still fun like doing the designing for functional wear and stuff like that, but I do prefer like doing the conceptual things, and that does inform like designing for functional and things like that, but yeah, my preference is the conceptual stuff.
Over the functional.
Yeah.
Cool. And then like, obviously sustainable design is something that we're all, you know, is prominent in the industry right now, and we're all, as creatives, have to consider it. Obviously the work that you do lends itself perfectly to that subject. I just want to like open up to the three of us, like the three of you. How do you bring that into the work that you do, and the way that you think about the way that you create, and what like technologies or things that you see in the future from the design industry that you want to implement into your work through the lens of sustainable design? And open it up to the three of you.
I think it just starts from growing up in a Nigerian household. There's always this like thing where there's always a polythene bag full of other polythene bags at the bottom of the sink, and that was like a standard. Like, you never threw anything away. Like, you know, you buy a bucket of ice cream or like anything comes in a very like sturdy container, you have to reuse it for something else. So that was like the foundation of everything. But then even going back, the track went from the way Yoruba people approach like building architecture, just everyday life. Everything was very sustainable by default. That was like the culture. So I think growing up in that would kind of like set the base standard of how I should operate as a designer. Is, can I use this all over and over again? If there's something being packaged, can the cargo be reused for something else, for example? So I think that forms the basis of my design career.
I would definitely say in terms of like, even for me, minimalism. For me, I define minimalism as like removing anything excess or removing anything that's not needed to be. I think Apple's a great brand that showcases that in terms of sustainability and functionality. Like, you have the interface, it's simple, it's easy to use. You don't have the extra noise of like, you know, messaging or whatnot. And I think when you're trying to be sustainable, essentially, you want to remove excess, you want to remove weight or baggage. So I think even from a design perspective, even when it comes to like MOQs for us, we try and make sure that it's small MOQs, we don't produce too much. just to make most of what we're creating. So yeah.
That is something actually, like, when I think about sustainable design, that is actually something, before I move on, like, that a lot of people don't actually consider in designing sustainably.
Yeah.
It's actually just designing in a way where you use less.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both in like input but also output as well, which is quite nice. Okay, Teju, so you touched on your Nigerian heritage. So I want to talk about that a bit. You know, how your cultural heritage impacts your design philosophy and your creative process. Can you delve into that a bit more? Can you explain, like, how do you bring you know, your cultural heritage into your process, and how does that impact the way that you work and the way that you think creatively?
I was lucky enough to grow up on this street where it was full of like craftsmen, so weavers, ceramicists, furniture makers, etc., etc. And they were quite flamboyant in the way they built things. Everything kind of had like a hint of like Italian or American or etc., etc., due to influences from the West and colonialism and etc., etc. But then going, like, if you do like the deep dive, things like when you look at African fabric and the pattern and it's colorful, it's actually Dutch. And you're just like, wait, what? And it's like kind of like, you know, the Dutch took this way of printing and they took it around the world, and no one really got it until they took it to West Africa, and then it kind of took hold. So like when you think about like, oh, an African fabric, you think something like overly colorful, but actually when you look behind the curtain, it's very similar to the Japanese, where there's like loads of like dye pits and dyeing techniques and like, you know, like natural fabrics and weaving and et cetera, and you discover that everything is quite reduced, quite minimal, not so extravagant, which is something that's been like kind of adopted, which kind of informed my art practice, because I was like, okay, how can I produce things in the kind of old original kind of pattern? How can I just use materials as honestly as possible? And that's how I found aluminum. And I was like, this is a material that can be infinitely recycled, and it still keeps its own mass, because it's very difficult to find like metals like that. When you smelt it, usually there's like a reduction in mass, but with aluminum you kind of get like a bit of the same. So I kind of found out, I was like, hey, I'm just gonna make everything out of aluminum.
I see, okay. But then you also mentioned that, so like touched on like some Asian cultures as well. So it doesn't only come from your own blood, from Nigeria, West Africa. You're absorbing cultures from around the world as well. Then.
I think it's a very Nigerian thing to do. It's just like there's a lot of things that happen. Like we have like a tea culture, but tea culture is basically like hot chocolate, but we call it tea. So it's just like we kind of take things and we kind of make our own like definition out of it. And when you kind of really look back, you kind of think what's actually like Nigerian without any kind of like influence. It's actually quite small, and everything that is kind of associated with Nigerian is actually like imported from somewhere else.
What's funny is like I didn't actually realize, but they're all Nigerian. When we just realized that when we were just chatting before. So my dad is actually from Jamaica, so I'm the only one that's not from Nigeria here. But then I want to then pass that topic across to you two actually then. About how are you inspired? Like how do you bring like cultural heritage into your work? You know.
Yeah, I agree with what Teju said about how Nigeria is very like resourceful. Like we try not to waste things, and we try to reuse things. Like that's how I found the 40 kills. I don't know what they were going to use them for, but they were just there. You know, we have like the plastic bags and stuff like that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that we try to think of ways to not waste, basically. I guess coming from Nigeria's a developing country, we don't have much resources compared to other countries, so we try to use what we have and create more out of it. So that has subconsciously like influenced me in my work, and I've grown up in that environment, you know, with my family. So that's one way, and another way is that we are very colourful in Nigeria. Our clothes are very colourful. I know you said that was like what, Dutch or something. I was still gonna say it's Nigerian, but yeah, no, we're very colourful, and we take pride in our attire. attire. Yeah, we take pride in our attire, and we like to go out and we like to dress up. So things like making sure like the outfit I have is something I'm comfortable in, but also look good in. Stuff like that has influenced me in my work.
Yeah, I would say our resilience, because growing up in a Nigerian household, like my mom, seeing her like go to the market, like she wouldn't take no for an answer, if that makes sense, and the haggling aspect as well. So I think when you have a brand, obviously business, you kind of have to learn how to talk a certain way or act a certain way. And even I always have this thing I always say in the office that it's basically there's no as an answer for me. Like there's a way around it, there's a solution to it, but there's no. So even when it comes to we can't do this, no, there's a way around it, but you just have to find the solution to that way. So I think just having that resilience, and even growing up, my mom would always tell me, like I was always that kind of rebellious child. So like when I dress a certain way, like I was kind of like trying to from early be like fashionable, and she would always tell me to change. And out of 4 of my siblings, I would always be the one to be like, no, I'm not changing, and I'll go to like wherever it is I'm going to, and how I want it to look. So I think I've just always had that kind of mindset that, you know, not to have a hard head, but kind of like when you have a focus, you're able to execute it if you believe in yourself and if you assert yourself a certain way. So yeah.
Teju, so back on you, man. Wow, it's really loud now. Crazy.
It wasn't working before.
Okay. I'm looking for so could you share you talked really well on like how actually globally these different cultures and these different nuances like really inspired you. Could you give us like an example where combining like these historic traditions with modern techniques has created like a product which locally and globally like resonates to you, like whether it be in your own work or something that inspired you and you just think that's an amazing fusion of these two worlds?
I think that I'll give an example of I think it was a few months ago, I was on Dzine. Dzine, you know, the architecture website.
Okay.
Yeah, Dzine.com, Dezeen. Yeah. And I saw an article where someone said, oh, look at this architect using bamboo in a new way. Yeah. And I was just like, and I looked at what the person was doing, and I was like, this is like traditional Nigerian design. We use bamboo for like scaffolding and for everything. And I think it's really good that those kind of things are coming back, things like bamboo, straw, people looking to use like clay, and just like generally like this old sustainable push to use like kind of natural fibers. Like even when you go to like, you know, new buildings and et cetera, they're like, oh, you know, this carpet is made from like recycled wheat from somewhere else and et cetera. So I think it's really nice to see this like it becoming a trend and becoming cool, because I think that that's the only way people will ever take like sustainability seriously, if it still looks cool, quote unquote. But personally, my grandparents were blacksmiths. So I've always been like around like metal and et cetera. So I would finding aluminum, I was like, that's like a nice connection to have and to kind of carry that tradition like a little bit forward. I think that with like my parents, it was kind of, everything was kind of geared towards, you know, you need to be like a doctor, lawyer, engineer, that kind of rhetoric and et cetera. And it was very confusing for me growing up, because there was this street full of artisans and everyone made like really beautiful work. And they were seen as kind of like lesser people. They were like, you know, if you don't study hard, you're gonna become like these people. And I'm like, these people are the richest people on the street. Like, what do you mean? So I think, you know, creativity being taken seriously again, and people actually believing that they can actually have a creative career. I think it's one of the things that I'm trying to like take back. But also at the same time, I've been to Nigeria recently. I was there for like the past 4 months. And my memory as a child was like, there was this artisans and everyone was really good at what they did and et cetera. But then going back, that tradition, that history, I can see it kind of dying off a little bit because of like the deviation of careers and whatnot. And I'll speak to an artisan and they'll make something and I'll be like, this is not what I was expecting. I was expecting like something like, you know, you've been meticulous about this.
But that's kind of becoming like harder and harder to find. So I think the challenge is like, how can I revigorate that? How can I like, you know, bring back that spirit of craftsmanship?
And that would be through blending that into modern techniques and modern approaches. Yeah, I remember one of the first times I visited Hong Kong, and it was like crazy because all of the scaffolding used was bamboo, and I'd never seen it. It's always like steel and metal, and like just to see a natural material used in such a way, and like to build like, massive sculptures. You know, it's not something that you'd think bamboo would be strong enough to do, but it's amazing to see. And in Jamaica, like they're building like boats with bamboo too as well, which is crazy to see. Yeah, I mean, now we're on material, it's great for my next question. So like material, obviously, material choice plays a critical role in conveying cultural authenticity, especially through storytelling. So can you describe your process when selecting materials to work with for both your objects and your drawings, including your art? And is there any cultural significance in this selection process to you when thinking about what materials to use?
So being someone that grew up both in Lagos and London, I found myself like a person of two places because it's been like kind of half and half growing up in both. And the Nigeria I knew doesn't kind of exist anymore, and I don't particularly belong here either. So my work is kind of like, I've been able to find that middle ground by creating this fictional universe where all these things exist. I just had an opening in Lagos like a month ago, and it was kind of paying homage to the place to where I'm from, where all these creative artisans still existed and everything, like everything still like it became like a very progressive utopian society that kind of moved forward. And I feel like that's the only way I can kind of marry both like things I've learned from here and my history. How it plays in material-wise is building stories around these objects, whether it be furniture or it be artwork. So for example, this aluminum furniture series I created was based on this fictional place, this fictional village where everyone lived on an aluminum deposit. And that meant that everything they made was out of aluminum. This place doesn't exist, but there are places across Nigeria where, because they live next to a very great resource like straw, or like they have a big clay deposit, that meant that all the houses, everything was made out of straw and clay and et cetera, or whether it's bamboo, they live next to a bamboo plantation, that kind of influenced the way they built their society. So that's the way I'm kind of referencing that. I'm taking that history and putting it into a fictional context.
Amazing. Like I did see that you was in Nigeria. So that last 4 months, that's what you're working on, that entire period. Amazing. Emmanuel, moving to you, bro. So you're the co-founder of Seventh, and as a lover of minimalist design myself, obviously, like when I first saw the brand, it resonated greatly with me. So can you share what initially drew you to minimalism in design as your design practice, and how that, you know, how do you see your brand evolving like through that philosophy?
Definitely, I think it goes back to like what I was saying about defining what minimalism is for me. I can never say that word. It's hard. It's so hard. But like I said, it was literally just removing the excess, anything. So for us, we have two main goals in terms of what we create when we design, and it's always about product and impact. And where you have two, the blend of two, it should be simple in terms of like, even for us, when we brought it into the element of design, for me, I will always look in my mirror and be like, I want to make sure I don't look like I'm doing too much, but then I still want to be loud, if that makes you want to look good. So it was like, how do you look good without, because obviously you have designer labels and they have the logos everywhere, they have the designs everywhere, and that's great. Obviously it's amazing, there's nothing wrong with that, but for us it was more so, how can you just be bold but be quiet at the same time, kind of like what quiet luxury is. So it was just stripping the design down to like 3 elements. 1 would be the silhouette of the design, 2 would be the quality of the design, and then 3 would be the shade or tone. And those 3 things, we try to ensure that it's like always hitting a top level. And I think for us, that's how we were able to create such great design. And I think in terms of, even from an aspect of when you're putting on the clothing, we wanted it to kind of make you feel like I don't need to go anywhere else to buy anything. Or if you want to wear 7th, you can wear it with anything you have in your wardrobe. You know, sometimes when you go into a store and you're like, oh, I want to buy this, but I don't know if it's going to fit well in my wardrobe. But that wasn't the case when we were designing. We were like, we want to make sure that people are able to fit this in perfectly. And again, minimalize spending in other aspects. And even when we pick our colors, we're always trying to ensure when we're picking our colors that it fits in with our previous collection, so that you're not just buying into something and it's like kind of like a bit of a shock. You're buying into something knowing that, okay, if you've bought from us before, it can also simultaneously work with whatever you've had previously. But essentially, yeah, minimalism for me has been, it's like I said, Apple's a huge inspiration for me, because when I look at what their brand ethos is, it's like an ecosystem, from the MacBook to the headphones to the iPad, you know, even how they started and how they've evolved. And when you look at the product, it's so simple and it's so unique in the way it just feels. It's an amazing quality one, it's functional, you can use it, you can navigate yourself easily on it. And it's like what they do, which I love so much, is like once you buy into Apple, you never kind of stop buying into Apple. It's like they hook you. So essentially that's what I always kind of saw minimalism as. It's like sustainability, longevity, you know, it should be a legacy, it should last longer, do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of like my inspiration and how we were able to kind of like create what we create.
Dope, thank you very much. I think like as creatives, we all also understand like designing something less, but keeping the quality high, the interest high, you know, the functionality high is a real challenge, you know, like the approach to designing it. It's almost easier, especially like for myself in footwear, like it's almost easier to design something that has a lot going on and to make it look interesting because of that, you know. But, you know, the skill in like less is more, and being able to execute at a high level in all these different areas, but achieve a minimalist design is obviously very challenging. Like, so like, how do you within 7th like navigate that? Like, what are the key like principles you'd say?
I guess it is hard, because as much as something can look simple, you'll find that there's a lot of difficulties. One could be like costs of, you know, materials. But I think for me personally, not to compromise is something that I always ensure I do. I think I take it back to the last collection we did, autumn winter. We had an amount of products we wanted to put out, and essentially this was kind of like the projection for the year. Okay, we had this amount of products to put out, but because of the quality wasn't up to standard, the cuts, and unfortunately certain things we weren't able to do, we ended up cutting almost like half of the collection. So for me, that was like, even though it kind of stung a little bit, because obviously you have these ideas and what you want to do, in the end it actually worked out better, because the products that we actually loved and came out well ended up doing really, really well also, and people loved it. People, you know, bought into it. And I think for me, if I don't compromise, then you'll be able to see it through the way we push out the product. But if we have a product that we don't like, you'll be able to tell as well, because we won't push it out, we won't feel it, we won't go crazy about it. Essentially, it's like you have to love what you're producing, you have to love what you're creating. So I try not to compromise when it comes to like designing. And I think in terms of like sustainability, I think for me, also again, like I said, obviously sometimes when you're creating, even though it may look simple, you actually find that it can be more expensive, or it might cost a lot more. So even certain things like not overproducing or cutting down your production costs to ensure you're creating, like, maybe it could be limited edition pieces, you know what I mean? You don't have to go and like spend crazy amounts, just working within what you've got. So yeah.
I think like this is now making me think. So Tega, you did that Nike collaboration recently, right? Which is, congratulations by the way, that was dope. And like, how does then, because Emmanuel touched on quiet luxury. How does quiet luxury, how does that get translated into your world? Like, I saw you posted recently that Serena Williams inspired dress, right, which didn't make the cut. You said, but that was dope. And like, to me, that's a good example of quiet luxury in your space. You know.
Thank you. So the question is, how does quiet luxury translate into?
How do you translate it into your world?
Well, that's a good question, because I feel like my sort of products or concepts are very quite loud in terms of like branding and stuff, because I have quite an affinity with branding and logos and what they symbolize and what they mean to people in a psychological way. But I think the point of quiet luxury is that the quality is still there. So what you're buying is not just a brand name. Like, you're buying something that you're confident in the quality, you're confident that it's gonna last and things like that. So I try to translate that into my work in the sense that although there's still like a brand in there, what someone is buying is that they're appreciating the quality and they appreciate the design work that's gone into it. For the Nike collab that you touched on, like, the dress didn't make the cut because we couldn't like find the right material to produce it with for the production quantities. So that kind of translates, I guess, into minimalism. Like, you need to be intentional about what you do, because if we had made that dress in a different material or something, not many people would have been able to wear it. We needed something stretchy because it's quite tailored. So that's also considering like what you put out there and the thought process and creative process behind it.
Just out of curiosity, what was your favorite item from that collection?
There's too many. Like, there's some that I haven't put out yet because that also didn't make the cut. But I think the blaze in the skirt was one of my favorites from the collection. And if you don't know about it, you should check out on my Instagram.
Is there a round two?
Not in the works yet, but you should tell him that.
So we've touched on like each of your own like individual like creative worlds. I want to like move on to our career paths as a whole, like looking a bit into our journeys as like multifaceted creatives. I think we all naturally have that in common, which is quite nice, you know. So we all embody that for sure within the creative industry. What advice do you have to like young creatives who are still discovering their own paths, especially thinking about how we've all took our own different paths and maybe not gone down the normal route, let's say. So yeah, what advice would you have for those trying to find their own identity?
I think, because I take me for example, I kind of, like I said, I didn't see myself being in this position. Like, this is not something that I dreamt about from young. I actually wanted to be a chef growing up. Crazy. I worked at Wagamama as a chef. So being anything creative wasn't at all in my like goal. So I fell into it, but what I realized was when I fell into it that I can actually learn as I'm doing it. There's so much out there to learn, but you have to also in yourself make effort as well. So obviously if you want to do something, it's great, you have that goal, you have that aspiration, but what are you doing to make the steps? Learning, like right now everything's out there, like podcasts, watching videos, reading. It's something that I've never been the best at reading, but like for the past few years it's like something that I've actually enjoyed doing because you learn so much, even through traveling, opening your awareness to things. But definitely I think having that kind of like mindset to just do it and not procrastinate is one thing, because I know as creative sometimes we get into